learned today briefly on how we're going to create dynamic actions. We learned how we can trigger them by knowing our selectors. And we also know now how to try to debug them as well. But what's the ultimate goal of the whole exercise of us having dynamic actions on the screen, right? It's to enable users to pass data from the screens into our processing. Like mostly that's going to be PLC, right? And there's numerous ways, and I picked 3 here to present on. And I think these are 3 most common ones you're going to encounter on how to do this. So let's jump again into the app. Well, if you're going to download the app, it's simply structured as simple demo, custom selectors, debug, and then under complex, there's these things that I am demoing now, and pretty much these 3 are now we're going to cover. There's a few additional ones that you can check by yourself, but I won't go into the details of them now. So first and most common way that you see, I think it's even in a sample dynamic action application. We have a report, we have some rows on a table, and I think I have a few dummy rows in here, for example, that test. And if I wanted to delete, so we want to make this page and report have a button, that's going to do, I'm going to click. If I want to delete, and I'm happy, and I say yes, so I want to say cancel, in this case, just to keep the records here for testing. The point is, how do we pass an employee number, which is an ID of, which is a primary key in this table, like, and we want to use this ID, pass it with a click of this button into processing that we're going to do. So let's look behind the screen for this one. Create, cancel, okay, that's fine. I'm hoping my network won't give up on me. Come on, see if we can do this. This way as well. Okay. Do it again. Perfect. Dynamic. Thank you. And now let's render it. Awesome. Okay, so to give a quick intro, so we have a report, which is select, bring that up, which is select from demo amps and departments, and we select different columns here, and now we're going to drill in how we're passing the data into. All good. So we have columns, and the one that I used, so we created a link here, so that's going to be to map that back to the screen, so that's acting as this column. All good, so we have a heading that's delete, that's the column, it's a type of a link, and then this link has certain properties here, so we made the target to be a hash, there's a link text to it, and then the key is this part here, which is ID equals to hash ID hash. So this thing is telling it, use my ID of the table and pass it back here as an ID of this element, right? So if I go back quickly to the page, if I look into the inspect element here, all good. So I see that a link or have attribute ID has 77H2. So that's going to be passed back to my processing to my PLC. So jumping back to it, and this element has a class of delete me, which is a class that I did for demo purpose, and then we created a dynamic action here that's going to click on my click of delete me class, which is a custom jQuery selector here. So again, selector is going to do you good. We created an alert like confirm action. Do you show when you want to delete this employee? If you continue, and you set the value of this into a page 18 emp number. Then when temporary that item is set, then we execute the PLC call. What we do, okay, delete from that table where emp equals to page 18 emp number. And then to finish it off, we do refresh and we do execute JavaScript which says alert emp revoked, for example. So the key point was getting the element. So my link had an ID attribute set to hash ID hash, and this is how my JavaScript is picking up. And then we're saying affected elements, so place that value of an ID into a PM number here. Simple, but the reason why I don't like using this one is because it uses a temp item on a page. So we're going to do another example here, slightly more complicated, doing the same thing, but we're going to see how else we can do the same thing. Perfect, so pretty much it's going to behave the same. If I click here, it's going to pop up saying, okay, do you want to continue? If I say yes, it will be to read the row. Jumping up to this page to see why and where the difference is. So we're going to cover the example number 2. So it's same page, same report, pretty much everything you're saying. There's the same column ID, but this time I'm also doing the link. But now I'm doing something different. If you notice here, there is data-ID. And I define my own data attribute for this element. And pretty much it's a HTML5, I think, attribute that you can use for any tag on your page, or like at least inputs or links and things can have a data attribute. And then data dash and this IDs basically came from my head. So it could be anything. I could do data dash Lena, for example. So if I do data dash Lena here, then I would have to pick this up later in the processing. So let's see how we did that. If I open, so again, pretty much the trigger, so data ID is passing my emp now here, and my action again is going to trigger on delete me class, so that's going to be the selector. So if we check that out, so it's again a click on a class .delete me. Perfect, and we look into what the actions are. So we have a confirm again. This is the key one, so I'm going to jump into that one. Apologize. And the difference between this one and previous one, we had this.trigger.id before, and now we have $this trigger element .data ID. So get me the data ID attribute of this trigger element. And we're doing the same. So we're going to pass it back to emp now, and then after we do this, pretty much the same PLC process is going to trigger. So this is the difference of two different. One was the data attribute, the second one, and the previous one was the ID of a link. And the last one, and the most complicated example I'm going to cover today, is pretty much example number 3, where we're gonna use apex.event to handle this. So we can notice that it's a little bit different. Do you want to proceed? Yep. So I'm going to do cancel. Let's have a look how example number 3 is doing. So the particular reason why this is probably the way I normally do it is there is no temporary items that I put my IDs in. So I usually don't carry this along with me. Pretty much it's same report, same columns. Again, most interesting thing is on ID. So notice here that my type now is not a link anymore. But I have something different here, which is HTML expression here. For those of you who are new, don't get scared by this. So pretty much I'll quickly show you where it's coming from. apex.oracle.com. And then we're going to do AUT. Perfect. So Oracle Apex team created an awesome, I would say, reference application, but there's you go on the reference and then you have a button builder here. And pretty much these things is something I never remember and never tried to remember. And you have an example of a button here. You can customize just by selecting different settings here. And that's exactly what I've done for mine. And pretty much what I've done is, all good, I made it small and configured these few bits, and then pretty much I picked up the end results of this one. So that's this HTML tags and think that were generated here for me. I can pretty much copy and paste it over here. So you can notice there's a button, and all I added was this on-click event thing. So this is a custom thing coming from me, where I'm saying it's, okay, we're going to use apex.event API, which has a function called trigger, where we can provide and give a name and pass in values in a brackets of things that we want to do. So the difference between this approach and the other approaches, the first two is, in the first two I was passing in an ID, but usually passing one value to your processing is not enough. So sometimes you want to pass more than one. And this is demoing how we can pass and values here. So I could do, if I wanted to expand, what I can do another one, I can say, I don't know, demo, and then I can say, okay, I can have any value testing. And then this would be another value exposed to my processing afterwards, right? For the purpose of this, I had two. So I have an ID, which I'm going to use later on, and I have an action type, which is here hard-coded to rejection. But this could also come from my query as well. So I could do something along hashtag and then action. That would come from my query, okay? And this on-click pretty much is triggering a custom JavaScript dynamic action. Okay, so I'm just going to hop out of that, and let's see how we define our. So we've seen it in this example. I have a click element here, but sometimes your actions will be triggering on something more deeper than that. So you can use custom here. That's exactly what I did in this example, which is using a custom, and then that's my event. That's my event name. So my listener is waiting for this. So once my button emits the event with this name, then this will kick in, and we're listening here on a document level. I won't go into details of this at this point. There's a good explanation on a help again if you want to go through. So it's pretty much giving you what and when you want to use. But the beefy stuff you see, so you see I have far less accent here. Wrong way. Yep. So I have a confirm, which I usually carry with me as a standard thing. You want to continue or not. And then we have a dynamic action here, which is doing a JavaScript code. It might look a little bit complex for you guys who are new to it, but there's really not much to it. So the key point is these two lines. So my ID that I sent is being fetched as this.data.id, and the action attribute or the value that I sent in this.data.action is being fetched by these two lines. And pretty much everything else is I'm using a application process. So not application, but it's on the page here. It's called delete amp. I'm passing these two values in, and then pretty much we're going to refresh the region. We're going to write that message up, will be successfully deleted. And just let me show you the deleted PL/SQL side of it. So on the PL/SQL side, all I need is the ID. So that's being fetched by Apex application GX01 element, which is the ID. The other one would be 02. If I had more, it would be 03, 04, 05 here. And then pretty much once I have these values here, my PL/SQL code can start running and do whatever I want.
Lino, can I interject for a second?
Yep, sure.
So we had a couple of good questions that I wanted you to address, and one is if I'm running into timing issues with my dynamic actions, or if let's say I find out that my dynamic actions are growing. I have like 12 or 15 different actions that all need to fire sequentially, and it's getting hard to manage.
Okay.
What recommendations, or would this solution be something you could use, or?
Perfect. So let me that's pretty much part of my next, just bear for a second, Tyson, on that one, and then whoever asked that question, I'm going to address it in 5 minutes or even less than that.
Perfect.
To sum this up, so pretty much three ways how we can parse the attributes. If we need one, we can use the attributes of an element, or we can do data attributes for one. And then if you use more, usually you would end up using episode, event, or trigger, and then pass the array of your values, right? To go into that one, Tyson, so it's going to come back as a good or bad practices section. So let me quickly go through. So the one thing to remember is please name your dynamic actions nicely, or you put some useful name to it. So when you go back in 6 months' time, imagine what's going to be there for you, and then you have to understand it again, right? This is a real life. I had a page, and it had new 1 to 50. So I had new 1, new 2, new 3, new 4, and they had different elements or new different actions triggering underneath it. And the other thing is to note here, there's two problems. So the name is one of them, which is obvious, but the other one was there was a set value that was doing a select name from amp, and then there was another one set value which was doing select amp number from amp. So don't do two if you're going to the same table, right? So you can leverage and be way faster if you do one instead of multiple set values, right? Going quickly here is, so I had an example here where each of these action, which was move, receive, and ship, had different buttons here that you could trigger on. And then you had on the left-hand side down there, you could say, show and hide one button, show and hide the other button, and do something. One people could move button or receive button, but you could do all of this in one dynamic action. So if you can consolidate, you're going to save yourself a lot of supporting time eventually. We're coming back to your question. This is one of the how do we make things faster, right? This was an example. Usually we recommend people to use PL SQL if things need to run on a page load. So you don't want to go JavaScript way or dynamic action way if you can do it in a PL SQL process, right? But in my example, I had a REST API call that was taking roughly 30 seconds, and we couldn't make it faster because it was from a different company, and we just had to use it as is. And then if I use it as a PL SQL process on a page, literally you would click a button or a link to it, page would render for 30 seconds, you couldn't do anything, and then the page would show up. So what we did is we turned it around, so we use a JavaScript or dynamic action on page load, doing exactly the same thing, but then the page renders immediately, but you just have that loading icon on the region that needs to be refreshed once the getting or fetching of the data is done. So I would recommend you, at least in web and in REST APIs, if you're making calls that are longer term or something that takes a little bit longer than normal, then pretty much this could save you the right. Another one along these, hopefully you won't see this one, was I had a customer that came to me saying that he has 470 something elements on a page, without all in a single region, with heaps of dynamic actions on individual items without classes or anything. So there was no way for me to group it. And just for the record, I mean, we made it work at the end, but we had to use PL SQL code returning. So we instead of doing the automatic DML process, we used PL SQL code that was fetching the data. Pretty much the things worked. Of course, we separated things into regions, into several pages, but keep in mind that this can also be a problem for you. And then Tyson, coming back to you, trying to address that question that you had, that we had in a chat box. So creating dynamic actions is easy, and as the time goes, you add more, you end up having something which is on the right-hand side, like a depth null dynamic action, then you have multiple true actions, and then after a while, it's impossible to debug this. And just by action, I was working on a Fabi application recently with Vincent and the other guys, and then I encountered code on the left. And then I was thinking, like, I'm usually not a person who likes JavaScript code too much. I'm like, if I have to, I'll do it, but otherwise I'm declarative, right? But I did have an example where I had to debug someone's code that was looking to do things like on the right-hand side. And it would be way, way easier for you to understand what someone written on the left than on the right. So in this case, I highly recommend you do the custom JavaScript code and don't be afraid of it. It's easy to debug, it's easy to follow, it's easy to change, and it saves you time supporting it. Right? Will it make it faster? That's probably not the answer that I can say at this point, right? But even if you're new, don't be afraid to go JavaScript way, right? And this code on the left that I have an example of, it's like a book, or what I'll say Bible, but anyone can read that, right? Tyson, do you think that addresses that question, or would you go deeper into it?
No, I think that's good. I think the one thing that I would add, in also kind of layered into that question, was an issue with timing. In kind of the sometimes things happen asynchronously when we really wanted them to happen serially or synchronously. And so one thing that you didn't point to here, but if you really need to, there's a namespace, an Apex namespace, and it's apex.server.process. And if you need to invoke PL SQL processing at a very specific time and you want to write some reusable code, that is definitely something that you could consider.